the History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Where is Daredevil?
I'm right here. Don't miss the return of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again.
So what's next?
I feel liberated.
We're gonna take this city back.
Over-medicated.
In an all-new season, now streaming only on Disney+.
They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them.
I can work with that.
This should be tons of fun.
Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again, now streaming only on Disney+.
Volume 4, The Medieval World. Episode 73, The Battle of Jalut. Mayan Hawud is a natural spring in northern Israel, just a couple of miles north of its border with the Palestinian West Bank. Its Arabic name is Ain Jalut, and this particular translation provides its name to the battle that is the subject of today's episode. It is within the Fertile Crescent, an agriculturally favourable stretch of land in the Middle East. Some of the first agricultural settlements in the world emerged in the Fertile Crescent from around 12,000 years ago. Settlements and domesticated crops and animals meant growing populations. Settlements growing in population and size brought about trade and competition between the settlements. Competition brought about technological advancement and conflict. And with conflict came warfare. All of these things put pressure on settlements to produce, whether it be materials and surplus supplies for trade or weapons and constructed defences. Members of settlement populations became specialist farmers or traders or artisans or soldiers or architects or anything else that was required by the growing town or city. One of the earliest cities that became a notable power in the Levant was Damascus, the current capital of Syria, less than 100 miles northwest of Mayan Hawud. The Sumerians, who were one of the earliest recorded societies residing on the Iraqi coastline of the Persian Gulf, recognised a people called the Amorites, who occupied lands of the Levant from the 3rd millennium BCE. As time advanced, the most powerful settlements became kingdoms, and the most powerful kingdoms became empires. The lands of today's battle episode were within an area known as Canaan, very much central to the stories of the Hebrew Bible. And the lands of Canaan would be strongly influenced by the new kingdom of Egypt going into the second half of the 2nd millennium BCE. After the decline of the new kingdom, it is believed that Israel emerged in these lands as referenced in the stories of the Bible. During the 1st millennium, the mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire conquered the lands of Israel, but the region didn't lose its Jewish identity. It still didn't lose its identity when the Neo-Babylonians conquered the Neo-Assyrians and tried to exile the Jews from Jerusalem to Babylon. However, This is a land that fell under the control of many great imperial movements over the years. Persians, Egyptians and Greek-speaking cultures all had a period of control over the lands of the Israelites before the Romans came and dominated for themselves. Judea was often at odds with the Romans as the Jews attempted to preserve the sanctity of their holy lands, while the Romans attempted to diminish the Jewish identity of the area in order to make it subordinate. Later in the first millennium, the Persians would attempt to retake the Levant from the Romans, but they so weakened each other in the process that the Muslim Caliphate from the south was able to capitalise on this, and when the Muslims took control of Jerusalem, so did they take control of the surrounding areas too. The Muslims would use mercenaries to fight alongside their own armies, and many of them would be of Turkic origin. The Turks had emerged to the north of the Muslim Caliphate, where the deserts turned to grassland. And while operating in the military service of the Caliphate, some of the Turkic mercenaries became quite powerful and influential, and they formed a breakaway state in Egypt standing against the Caliphate. Collectively, these non-Arabs were called Mamluks, and they would operate from Egypt, where they would quickly look to take control of the Levant. The lands of Egypt were contested over by various Mamluk and Arab dynasties over the final centuries of the first millennium, until the Ismaili Shia dynasty of the Fatimids ruled Egypt and the Levant all the way into the second millennium. A group of Turks called the Seljuks conquered most of the lands of the Middle East and Anatolia, and in the process of this, they kicked the Fatimids out of the Levant and back into Africa. This prompted a response from the Pope in Rome, who called for a Christian crusade against the Turks, and so large European armies gathered. Despite this being a crusade against the Seljuk Turks, many Europeans had ambitions of taking control of the Holy Land around Jerusalem. So when the Fatimids fought back against the Turks and took control of Jerusalem, the Europeans chose to make an enemy of the Fatimids in order to win control of the Holy Land and attempt to Christianise it. After Europeans took control of the Holy Land, the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt was taken over by the Ayyubids under their leader Saladin. Saladin was able to push the Europeans back out of the region and take control back into Muslim hands, but the Europeans fought back and remained in the region in small areas of the coast, but surrounded by the Ayyubids, who dominated the area. And this was the situation in the first half of the 13th century.
The Mamluks.
Mamluk is a term that refers more to status than ethnicity, and it was a Mamluk state that actually controlled Egypt going into the period of this episode's battle. Mamluk is an Arabic word that refers to a soldier who is a slave, and it first came into use on a significant scale during the years of the Abbasid Caliphate. The slave soldiers would have been of various ethnicities, so this is why Mamluk is not really an ethnic term. Many of the initial Mamluks of the Abbasid army were of Turkic origin, as it was mainly Turkic tribes who resided in the lands to the north of the Caliphate. The Abbasid dependence on the Mamluk soldiers rapidly became a problem because the military power of the Mamluks soon made them realise that they didn't need to follow instructions, and shockingly, in the anarchy at Samarra in the 860s, Mamluk guards murdered the Caliph, but solidarity between the Mamluks didn't exist, so although the power of the Abbasid Caliphate weakened due to the presence of Mamluks within their army, the Mamluks were just as likely to oppose each other as they were to oppose their masters. Often, when it is asked when the Mamluks ruled Egypt, many sources reference the Bahri Mamluks, who ruled over Egypt from the year 1250. But the Tulunids, who ruled Egypt from the year 868, are known to history as a Mamluk dynasty. The Tulunids were of Turkic stock, and they broke away from the central authority of the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasids took control back in the 10th century before another breakaway Mamluk dynasty called the Ikhshidids made Egypt their own just a generation later. The Ikhshidids were deposed from Egypt, but this time the enemy would come from the west, and the northern African coastal region known as Ifriqiya, the easternmost region of the Maghreb. The dynasty were the Fatimids, who claimed descent from Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. The Fatimids controlled Egypt for the following 2 centuries. As mentioned previously, the Fatimids were overthrown by Saladin of the Ayyubids, who migrated from the Middle East and were of Kurdish origin. The Ayyubids relied on Mamluks in their own army. The Mamluks being militarily trained, they would be confident in their own power, and the notion of slaves being captives of their masters does not really apply in this particular scenario. Often the Mamluks were somewhat indoctrinated as children to serve their masters in a military capacity, but in adulthood they had freedom, even though they would still belong to the Mamluk class. Members of the Mamluk class could be quite highly revered by their masters and entitled to a very privileged life, and some would be highly skilled horse archers. During the 13th century, a peoples called the Mongols, who originated in the Far East, started a great conquest of the lands of Central Asia, and as a consequence, many peoples were displaced, including a great many Turkic peoples. Many Turkic peoples headed in the direction of the Middle East, including the Kipchak Turks, and a number of these were brought into the Mamluk classes of the Arab dynasties of the Middle East, including the Ayyubid dynasty. In the fertile lands of Egypt, Mamluks would carry out the work of tax collectors, so essentially the Mamluks within the Ayyubid territory could become quite rich and powerful. The pressure on the Ayyubid state came during the 7th Crusade in 1249. The 7th Crusade was called by King Louis IX of France, after the Ayyubids allowed the displaced Khwarezmians to attack the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a Crusader state. The result of the Khwarezmian attack of Jerusalem in 1244 was successful, as the Europeans were pushed out of Jerusalem, and the result was the calling of the 7th Crusade. Part of the strategy of King Louis IX of France was to take control of the Ayyubid port city of Damietta, which would provide the rich Egyptian resources for the Crusader army from which they could attempt a retaking of Jerusalem. The Ayyubids were unable to prevent Louis from taking Damietta, and it was up to the Mamluks to take control of things in order to run Louis out of Egypt, before seizing control of Egypt themselves and establishing their own dynasty of rulers there.
The Ilkhanate.
The vast Mongol Empire had been established by their ruler Chinggis Khan during the early decades of the 13th century. As mentioned before, the rapid expansion of the Mongols caused a great number of individuals to become displaced, with many heading into the Islamic territories of the Middle East. As the Mongol Empire grew to a vast size, as is often the case, in order to maintain order in these vast lands, the lands would need to be divided into provinces that would be governed on a localised level. Chinggis Khan's plan for this would be to divide his vast territory among his 4 sons. The westernmost territories, which included the Eurasian steppe, was to be ruled over by the descendants of Chinggis Khan's eldest son, Jochi. These lands would become the lands of the Golden Horde. Chinggis Khan's second son, Chardai, would be granted the lands of Central Asia, and these lands would be known as the Chardai Khanate. The homelands of Mongolia were entrusted to his third son, Ogudi Khan, who would rule as the great Khan of the Mongol Empire after his father's death. Finally, the fourth son, Tuluay, would be sent southwest into the lands of the Khorasan in order to expand territories into the Middle East. The sons of Tuluay, also known as the Tuluids, became very important in the story of the southernmost Mongol territories, which dominated the established Silk Road trade routes, so they were very lucrative. Tuluay's eldest son was Mongke Khan, who would become the great Khan of the Mongol Empire. The second son, Kublai Khan, would become a very important figure in the conquest and development of the lands of China. The third son, Hulagu Khan, would be under his older brother's orders, the great Khan, Mongke Khan, and Hulagu would be dispatched to expand Mongol territories into the Islamic lands of the Middle East. Hulagu would be recognised as the ruler of the lands of the southwest, but he would recognise the superiority of his older brother as his great Khan. Therefore, Hulagu would become a subordinate Khan of his older brother. The Mongols would call a subordinate Khan an Ilkhan, and so Hulagu would become an Ilkhan, and the lands under his control would be considered to be an Ilkhanate, which is where we get the name Ilkhanate for the resulting state. During our episode on the Seljuk Turks, we told the story of how the Order of Assassins was established by a Shia Muslim called Hassan-i Sabah during the 11th century. Almost 2 centuries after, Hulagu's army came across the assassins, and over a period of 3 years, they would defeat the assassins and move deeper into the Middle East. The next target would be the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliphate was the ceremonial centre of Islam, with the Caliph representing the approver of Islamic conduct for much of the Islamic world. The Mongols held no regard for the sanctity of the Caliphate, and this simply represented more territory that they could bring under their control. Baghdad was besieged and the Caliph was executed. After Baghdad fell, the city was destroyed and the population heartlessly slaughtered, as was somewhat traditional behaviour for the Mongol armies. After 5 centuries, the Abbasid Caliphate was very abruptly brought to an end. The Mongols then turned their attentions to the lands of modern Syria, and in particular the cities of Aleppo and Damascus. The arrival of the Mongols would have been a joyous event for the Christian Crusader states, who welcomed the arrival of a mighty imperial movement with whom they shared a common enemy. Aleppo and Damascus were under the control of Ayyubid rulers, who were the Muslim enemies of the Crusader states. Hulagu's forces massacred the population of Aleppo, and Damascus was abandoned as a consequence, so the Mongols could now target the fertile lands of Egypt.
Qutuz.
Saif al-Din Qutuz was the Sultan of Mamluk Egypt when the Mongols of the Ilkhanate threatened his realm in 1259. There are some differing accounts of Qutuz's early life. It does appear that he was a Turkic child within the Khwarezmian Empire when the Mongols were invading Khwarezm during the 1230s. Qutuz was then sold to the Egyptians, so everything about his background led to him becoming a Mamluk in Egyptian territory. As we are already aware, Egypt came under Mamluk rule in 1250, and this opened the door for Qutuz to become an important statesman of the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt. By 1253, Qutuz was serving as the vice-sultan of Mamluk Egypt. Within Mamluk Egypt, there were different Mamluk tribes vying for superiority within the state, and Qutuz himself was a member of the Muizi Mamluk tribe. The ruling tribe of the state were the Bahri Mamluks. Things were starting to become serious after the Mongols had conquered the Abbasid Caliphate. Mamluk Egypt quickly realised that they could have a problem on their hands, with the Ilkhanate beginning to gather more power and very likely seeing Egypt as a valuable possession if they could conquer it. The Bahri Mamluk Sultan of Egypt was a teenager called Al-Mansur Ali. Qutuz recognised that having such a young sultan leading the country was a problem, and so he proposed that Al-Mansur Ali should be deposed and that Qutuz himself should be the sultan at least until the Mongol threat had been dealt with.
Kitbuka.
Nothing is written about the childhood of Kitbuka Noyan. All we do know about him is that he was a Naiman. The Naimans were a tribal group who originated on the eastern steppelands, where the Mongols first consolidated their dominance over their rival tribes. Kitbuka accompanied Hulagu Khan on his campaigns in the Middle East. The contemporary Armenian historiographer called Hayton of Korikos stated that Kitbuka was of the lineage of the 3 kings of Orient who were part of the story of the Nativity of Jesus. For that reason, Kitbuka is identified as a Christian. Kitbuka is definitely associated with the 1258 siege of Baghdad, as he served as a lieutenant in Hulagu's army. When the army of the Ilkhanate pushed on into the Ayyubid lands of Syria, the Christian Crusader state supported the Ilkhanate, and so Kitbuka may have had his own sense of Christian duty when the Holy Land was the next target. Despite being a Christian, it appears that Kitbuka spared no sympathy for his enemies, with one story of him personally beheading the governor of Damascus. A big moment came in Kitbuka's life when the Mongol great Khan, Mongol Khan, died in the year 1259. The Ilkhan, Hulagu, felt compelled to return to Persia with the majority of his forces, and Kitbuka was left in the Levant with the remainder, which still numbered about 20,000 individuals.
Prelude to the battle.
The Ilkhanate sent envoys to Mamluk Egypt to demand Egyptian surrender. Qutuz had not taken control of Egypt to simply give in to the Mongols, and so Qutuz beheaded the Ilkhanate envoys and displayed their heads on the city gates at Cairo. Who would want to be an envoy during the medieval age? This effective declaration of war prompted Kitbuka to move his forces across the Jordan River. Qutuz had combined his forces with those of the great Mamluk military commander called Baybars, and the entire Mamluk army, which was very similar in numbers to that of the Mongols, advanced northwards out of Egypt and into Palestine. This may have come as a bit of a surprise to the Mongols, as the Crusader states did not attempt to block the advance of the Mamluks through Palestine. Previously, Outremer, the alternative name for the Crusader states, had supported the Mongols in their battles against their mutual enemy, the Ayyubids. Now, Outremer was opting to try and stay out of it and choose a politically neutral position. Both armies had a considerable amount of cavalry. The Mongols were expert cavalrymen in any case. The Mamluks would also have expertise coming down from their Kipchak routes. Both sets of cavalry would contain expert archers. The Ilkhanate army certainly contained lancers, who also operated on horseback. The Mamluk army, led by Qutuz and Baybars, advanced towards the spring of Ain Jalut, and Kitbuka advanced to face them.
The Battle of Ain Jalut.
Due to the fact that the Mamluk army arrived in Ain Jalut first, they had an opportunity to prepare for the Mongol arrival in advance of their arrival. It was decided that the forces of Baybars would establish themselves on the field of battle, while the forces of Qutuz would hang back and try to remain undetectable under the cover of trees on the surrounding highlands. It may have been quite a risky tactic for the Mamluks to leave a small portion of the overall army out in the open, but this is exactly what they did. When the Mongols arrived from the east, Baybars' forces attempted to goad the Mongols into battle. Baybars' archers provoked the Mongol army by launching arrows at them, and then they retreated in a bid to draw the Mongol army forwards and into a more vulnerable position for Qutuz's hidden forces to attack them. Kitbuka ordered his forces to advance and crush the small force of Baybars that was attacking them. Baybars withdrew and the advancing Mongol army came into the range of Qutuz. Qutuz attacked the Mongols, but he would also be using a very unique weapon. The weapon was an early gunpowder weapon called a midfa, and this is one of the first instances of gunpowder weaponry being used outside of the Sinosphere, or the lands under the influence of Chinese culture. The weapon is an early form of cannon, but it was actually a handheld device. It may have been a mixture of charcoal, saltpeter and sulphur that was used as the explosive element. But with it only being a handheld device, the power of the weapon was not considerable when compared to later developments. If anything, rather than causing any physical damage, it may have been useful for startling and disorientating the enemy Mongols, as well as causing their horses to panic due to the loud and surprising noise when the weapon was discharged. We have also seen this type of weapon being referred to as a pot de fer. Midfa is actually an Arabic name. Some of the Mongol forces were engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the Mamluks in the centre of the battlefield, But the real damage was being done by the Mamluk horse archers, able to take advantage of the higher ground and able to overwhelm the Mongols by unexpectedly appearing from their cover. Kitbuka had to take action, so he made a decision that he needed to change from a defensive position and attempt an offensive action. So he ordered his troops to attack the Mamluk left-hand flank. It was during this Mongol push that Kitbuka was captured by the Mamluks, and it is not completely clear, but if it is true that some of the Syrian mercenaries in the Mongol army had chosen to defect, then this may have been the factor that condemned the Mongols to their fate. With their leader captured, the outcome of the battle would begin to become obvious. Kutuz is claimed to have shouted, "Oh my Islam," and his troops attacked the central bulk of the Mongol army. Many of the Mongols attempted to flee, but those who didn't or were unable to flee quickly enough were slaughtered. As the Mongols fled, the Mamluks were in hot pursuit. The chase went on for around 8 miles before a contingent of the Mongol army turned and engaged the pursuing Mamluks. This enabled a few thousand Mongols to escape the battle, but the damage had been done. The Mongols had been defeated.
Aftermath.
In just over half a century, the Mongols had built a vast empire from nothing. They seemed invincible, defeating every enemy that they faced. That was until now. The death of Mongol Khan in 1259 signalled the last time that a great Khan of the Mongols was truly regarded as such by the entire Mongol Empire. The defeat at the Battle of Ain Jalut in the following year finally demonstrated that the Mongols were beatable on the battlefield, and suddenly the world would believe that they could successfully stand up against them. Often, Mongol armies in past battles had been able to outthink and outmaneuver their opponents. On this occasion, the Mongols themselves had been outthought and outmaneuvered. Kitbuka showed no remorse after his capture. He remained defiant and honourable to his Mongol masters and their cause, and cast aspersions on the Mamluks and their actions. Kitbuka was subsequently beheaded. Despite Kutuz being the winning commander, he never made it back to Cairo because he was executed on his way back. Historians have pointed the finger of blame in the direction of Baybars, who himself had given so much to the battle against the Mongols and who had seemingly carried out his responsibilities in conjunction with Kutuz's wishes during the battle. Some deep-thinking historians have cited many complex reasons for Baybars wanting to get rid of Kutuz, but essentially there are some prominent facts here that have to be considered very seriously. Firstly, it would be Baybars who would become the next Sultan of Mamluk Egypt. And secondly, Kutuz, who claimed the title of Sultan under extenuating circumstances, was not of Bahri Mamluk origin, meaning that there was a degree of illegitimacy to his reign. And if Baybars always had an eye on becoming the Sultan, then he would have known that there wouldn't have been as much uproar about the execution of Kutuz than there would have been if there had been someone with a greater degree of legitimacy. Those for me are the standout facts. As the new Mamluk Sultan, Baybars quickly captured Damascus for himself and reinstated an Abbasid Caliphate, actually within Cairo itself, since Baghdad had been lost to the Mongols some 3 years earlier. The fragmentation of the wider Mongol Empire would have positive consequences for the Mamluks. When Hulagu Khan, the ruler of the Mongol Ilkhanate, heard of the defeat at Ain Jalut, he would be determined to take revenge. However, the Mongol state of the Golden Horde was now under the control of a first cousin of Hulagu Khan, who was called Berke Khan. And Berke Khan saw the victory of the Mamluks as an incentive to invade the Ilkhanate, pitting Mongol against Mongol. This was a welcome distraction for the Mamluks, who would now be able to cement their own standing in the Middle East without Mongol interference. Baybars would even offer to be an ally of Berke Khan against their common enemy, the Ilkhanate. The Mamluks would target the remnants of the European Crusader states of the Levant, and this would signal the beginning of the end for Outremer. From this point on, the Mamluks controlled the Levant, and the Ilkhanate had to be content to rule the lands up to Mesopotamia, but no further west. The Ilkhanate did eventually collapse, and the Black Death is named as a primary factor to the weakening of its centralisation and its subsequent fragmentation in the first half of the 14th century. Mamluk Egypt continued as a state until the 16th century, when a general weakening of central authority, economic strength, and a lack of modernisation allowed the Ottoman Turks to kick the Mamluks out of Egypt and take it for themselves.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Get business done with the new American Express Graphite Business Cash Unlimited card. With unlimited 2% cash back on all eligible purchases, unlimited 5% cash back on flights and prepaid hotels booked through American Express Travel Online, and a flexible spending capacity that can grow with your business, you'll have the confidence to keep building. Apply today and earn a welcome offer of $1,500 cash back after you spend $50,000 in qualifying purchases on your new card within the first 6 months of card membership. Terms apply. Learn more at go.amex/graphite.
Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of the History of the World podcast about the Battle of Ain Jalut. If you enjoy the podcast and you'd like to support the podcast, then please visit our website, historyoftheworldpodcast.com. Click on the Patreon link and sign up to make a monthly contribution. For as little as $1 a month. You'll become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati and qualify for gifts and rewards. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, drop me a line at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. Also, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Threads and Mastodon. If you can't get enough of the podcast, then look out for the special debrief episode where I'll be talking some more about the episode that you just listened to and a few extra bits and pieces besides. Before I leave you, I just want to apologise. It's a couple of days late on the podcast episode. That's because I've been thrown into absolute disarray. Hot World Studios is getting redecorated and I'm currently just sitting. It's actually, you might have even noticed the sound is very different. It's very echoey. But maybe my sound editing has taken it out. But it seems and sounds slightly different to me at the moment. But massive redecoration going on at Hot World Studios. Nonetheless, I'm still working, so don't worry about it. And I just apologise that I'm a couple of days late. Anyway, don't forget to listen to the debrief episode, which comes out accompanying this one, which tells you a little bit more about the sources used for the construction of this week's podcast and a bit of news from around the world of the History of the World podcast. So come and join me there. Until then, be good.
The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Please consider making a financial contribution by going to the historyoftheworldpodcast.com website and clicking on the Patreon link. Email the show at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And don't forget to join our social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Tumblr. See you next time.